Part 2. The Fall. Chapter 7. The New Captain. The cheers thundered down from the bleachers as the cheerleaders ran out onto the floor. As the 7 girls bounded across the gym, the noise rose and echoed until it felt as if the roof might be blown off. Kimmy led the girls onto the floor, and they immediately went into what they called their clap-clap routine. The girls clapped out a rhythm, and everyone in the bleachers repeated it as loudly as possible. As she clapped, Kimmy stared up at the colorful blur of kids filling the bleachers, spilling out onto the gym floor, standing along the walls. The entire school was at the pep rally. The hand clapping gave way to foot stomping. The bleachers quaked and trembled. The rhythm picked up, faster, louder. What a thrill, Kimmy thought. An excited grin spread across her face. What a thrill to perform for the entire school. What a sound! Like an earthquake or the stampede of 1,000 elephants. She knew she looked great in her new uniform. They all did. The maroon and white was so sharp, the skirt so crisp, and the sweater so bright. Their old uniforms had been ruined that night in the rain. But here it was, 2 weeks later, and everything was fresh and new again. And everyone was cheering their lungs out. Oh, almost everyone. Give me a T!
T!
Give me an I!
I!
Give me a G!
G!
What a sound, Kimmy thought, her grin growing even wider as her shiny black hair bounced around her face every time she jumped. They finished the cheer in a wave-like ripple, the girls going down in splits one after the other. Kimmy glanced down the row of cheerleaders, all so happy, so fresh and excited, as if the terrible night had never happened. There was Ronnie down at the end, radiant, shouting her heart out. Her curly red hair, caught in the bright lights, seemed to glow on its own. How happy she'd been to be back on the squad. And Deborah, normally so cool, so withdrawn, was cheering at the top of her lungs. Only cheerleaders, Kimmy thought, know what this is like. A lot of people put us down. They think we're wasting our time, or we're out of date or something. But that's because they don't know this special excitement, the special thrill of getting a huge crowd to forget itself and go wild. The cheer ended to raucous shouts and applause. Kimmy peered down the line of girls to see Corky and Bobby do their special double cartwheel. Ugh, she thought bitterly. What show-offs. They really make me sick. With their blonde hair and sweet innocent faces, always prancing around together trying to make the rest of us look second-rate. I could throw up. I really could. The echoing drums of the marching band brought Kimmy out of her dark thoughts. No, she decided, I'm not going to allow those 2 to ruin this day. I'm not going to give them another thought. Everyone stood and clapped along as the band played the Shadyside High marching song. I want only good memories of this pep rally, Kimmy thought, clapping as hard as she could. After all, the rally is in honor of us, in honor of how brave we were, in honor of how we survived that terrible night. The band ended its number to wild applause. Corky and Bobby did their cartwheel again, and Kimmy forced herself not to react. The girls all turned to her to begin the next cheer routine.
Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go!
Kimmy's eyes caught Miss Green leaning against the wall of her office and clapping along with them, a big smile on her usually dour face. In a few minutes, Miss Green will name me as the new captain, Kimmy thought. The thought sent a shiver of excitement down her back. It's something I've wanted for so long. I've worked so hard for it, so hard. I'm not knockout beautiful like the other girls. I'm not tall and well-built. I don't have straight blonde hair like the Corcorans, or look like a movie star like Jennifer. But I'm going to be captain. I'm finally going to be captain. She wished her parents could have been there to see it. To see the pep rally, to see their daughter, to see how exciting it all was. She had begged them to come, but as usual, they claimed they couldn't get away from their jobs. Just an excuse, Kimmy thought bitterly. Then forced those thoughts out of her mind. Nothing was going to spoil her day. Nothing. Whoa! The routine ended. The band started up immediately. Kimmy turned toward the far side of the gym, and the other girls followed her lead. As the band finished its number, a deafening cheer went up as Jennifer wheeled herself out onto the floor. She was wearing a new uniform too, Kimmy saw. In her hand was a maroon and white pennant with her name embroidered on it, the pennant they had given her in the hospital. She waved it from her seat as she vigorously wheeled herself across the gym. The applause grew and grew until Kimmy felt like covering her ears. Jennifer has been so brave during all this, Kimmy thought, staring at her in her wheelchair now lined up with the other cheerleaders. So brave and cheerful, even though she might never walk again. Even though her life was ruined. Kimmy wondered if she would have been so brave, so smiling, so accepting. Of course, Jennifer had nearly died that night, Kimmy remembered. Everyone had thought she was dead. So in a way, she was lucky just to be alive. But how could anyone consider being crippled, perhaps for life, lucky? Kimmy realized that the gym had grown silent. Jennifer had wheeled herself to a microphone and begun a short speech.
"I'm not good at making speeches,"
she was saying, her voice so weak and unsteady.
"I'd much rather be cheering than talking."
Nervous laughter rolled down from the bleachers. One of the drummers in the band hit a rim shot.
"I just want to say thank you to everyone at Shadyside High,"
Jennifer continued, her voice breaking with sudden emotion.
"You've all been so good to me. All my friends. Everyone. With all the cards and presents and stuff."
She waved the pennant. "And I just want to tell you all that I feel great. Go Tigers!" She pushed back from the microphone, waving her pennant, as the entire school erupted in applause. The band played the marching song again. Maroon and white streamers came flying down from the bleachers. Kimmy wiped away the tears that were rolling down her cheeks. She could feel herself begin to lose control, feel the loud, choking sobs try to force their way up. But she cut them off. This wasn't a sad day. It was a happy day. Everyone was smiling and cheering. This was a celebration that they were all alive. So why did Jennifer's smile make Kimmy feel like bawling? She turned away from Jennifer. It was the only way to keep the sobs down, to keep herself in control. "I'm just excited," she thought. "Overexcited, I guess." She took a deep breath and held it. Miss Green was approaching them, taking long strides across the gleaming wood gym floor, an intent expression on her face. She wore a maroon and white Shadyside sweatshirt over gray sweatpants. As she neared the microphone, her face flushed. She clasped her hands together behind her back. Miss Green hated public speaking. She seldom spoke at assemblies or pep rallies, and when she did, she always rocked back and forth on her feet and her voice quavered, and everyone could tell she was really nervous. She smiled at Jennifer, stopped, and made a short bow to her. Then, her face nearly scarlet, she stepped close to the microphone.
"I have an announcement to make,"
she shouted, her voice echoing off the four walls. It took a while for the crowd to quiet down. She stood silently, waiting until they did. Kimmy could see a muscle twitch in her jaw from nervousness. Poor woman, she thought sympathetically. Kimmy felt the excitement begin to tighten her own muscles. She realized she was smiling with trembling lips. She hoped no one could see them shaking.
"This is a day of celebration,"
Miss Green began.
"We are celebrating the great spirit of these Shadyside cheerleaders. And we are celebrating the spirit shown in particular by Jennifer Daly."
The gym grew absolutely silent. so silent, Kimmy could hear a car horn honking outside in the parking lot.
We are all celebrating today because Jennifer is back with us.
Miss Green continued, rocking on the heels of her white high tops.
Her courage, her strength, her indomitable spirit are an example for us all.
Applause.
Now it's time for me to announce the new cheer captain,
Miss Green said, glancing at Jennifer, who flashed her an encouraging smile. Kimmy took a deep breath. Her heart was thudding so hard she thought she might pass out. She gave Jennifer a big smile, but Jennifer had turned to stare up into the bleachers.
I've spent many hours thinking about this selection,
Miss Green continued.
And I know that the young lady I have chosen will lead the Tiger Cheerleaders with the same courage and spirit that Jennifer Daly has shown.
Yes, thank you, Kimmy thought, about to burst. She took another deep breath and let it out slowly. Miss Green cleared her throat and then, speaking loudly and enthusiastically, announced the name of the new cheerleader captain.
No!
Kimmy shrieked out loud.
Please, no!
Chapter 8. Kimmy Quits. Kimmy's cries of protest were drowned out by the applause that rang down from the bleachers. Several of the other cheerleaders, including Ronnie and Deborah, had turned to Kimmy to watch her mouth drop open and her expression turn to shock and dismay. Bobby Corcoran? How could Bobby Corcoran be named cheerleader captain? Unfair, Kimmy thought, feeling her surprise turn to rage. Impossible! After all, Kimmy had been named assistant captain last spring and had been on the squad for 2 years. She had worked so hard. So how could she be passed over for a flashy newcomer? Bobby had been on the squad for only a few weeks. She didn't know the school. She didn't know any of the routines. So how could Miss Green and Jennifer have chosen her? Kimmy stood with her shoulders slumped forward, allowing her unhappiness, her anger, to show on her face. She was miserable and upset, and she didn't care who knew it. As the applause died down and Miss Green continued talking, Kimmy glanced down the line of cheerleaders. There was Corky hugging her sister joyfully. Heather and Megan had rushed over to congratulate Bobby, and Bobby had the widest smile on her face, her eyes brimming with happy tears. Yuck, Kimmy thought bitterly. I know why she was named captain, because she's so pretty and I'm not. She's so blonde and skinny and disgustingly all-American. Okay, so I'm not skinny, and I don't have long blonde hair and look like a 17 model. But how could Jennifer and Miss Green do this to me? I'm a better cheerleader than Bobby Corcoran could ever be. I deserve to be captain. Everyone knows I deserve to be captain. Kimmy realized then that her entire body was trembling. Staring up into the bleachers, she felt her anger turn to embarrassment. Everyone is staring at me, she decided. Everyone in the entire school. They're all staring at me. They know I deserve to be captain. They know I've been cheated. She turned and saw Deborah and Ronnie studying her, their faces locked in sympathy, their eyes on Kimmy's face, trying to determine how Kimmy was taking the awful news. Everyone is watching me, Kimmy thought, forcing back the loud sobs that paused at her throat. Everyone is feeling sorry for me. I've never been so embarrassed. This is the worst day of my life. I'll never forgive Bobby. Never. And I'll never forgive Miss Green either. I just want to disappear. I just want to die. And as bitter thoughts continued to spin through Kimmy's mind, Miss Green finished her remarks and stepped back from the microphone with a relieved sigh. There was a scattering of applause. Kimmy saw Jennifer smiling, always smiling that brave smile of hers, wheeling herself to the side of the gym. And then Bobby led the girls into a circle to begin their final routine. No, Kimmy decided. No way. I can't do this. I'm too embarrassed, too humiliated. I won't do it. I won't. I quit, she decided. I quit the cheerleaders. She had joined the circle, followed by the others automatically, like some kind of sheep. But now, as they raised their arms high in the air to begin their routine, Kimmy uttered a cry of disgust and took off, running across the polished wood floor, running as fast as she could. Her eyes narrowed, nearly shut, her heart pounding in rhythm with each thud of her sneakers. Were those gasps of surprise from the bleachers? Were those startled questions? A worried buzz of voices? Kimmy didn't care. She was escaping and never coming back. As she reached the double doors to the corridor, running so hard she nearly collided with them, she turned and glanced back. The cheer had begun without her. Corky Corcoran had moved around to close up the circle. I'll pay her back too, Kimmy decided. Jennifer, Bobby, Corky, all of them. She was through the doors and running down the empty corridor when the first astonished sob finally burst from her throat. Chapter 9. Bobby and Chip. Congratulations! Bobby pulled open her locker door and turned to greet a girl she didn't know. Thanks, she said, smiling. I'm Carrie Taylor, the girl said, shifting the book she was carrying. She was a pretty, fragile-looking girl with blonde hair, even lighter and finer than Bobby's, and a warm, friendly smile. I have Science Lab 6th period, too. I've seen you there. Yeah, right, Bobby replied. I've seen you, too. I just wanted to say hi, and congratulations, Carrie said, with a shrug. Then she added, that accident must have been really scary. Yeah, Bobby said. It was. Well, see you tomorrow. Right. See you. The long corridor was emptying out as kids headed for home or after-school jobs. Bobby could still hear the ringing applause in her ears, the cheers, the shouts, the pounding of the drums echoing off the walls. Wow, I just feel so great, Bobby thought, pulling some books and a binder from the top shelf of her locker. I feel as if I could fly home. A few other kids she'd seen around school but didn't really know, called out congratulations as they passed by. Maybe Shadyside High is an okay place, Bobby thought happily. During her first weeks in school, she had wondered if she'd ever get to like it. The kids all seemed so snobby. They all seemed to have known each other their whole lives. Bobby wondered if she'd ever fit in or find friends of her own. But that day had erased all of her worries. It was going to be a great school year, Bobby decided. Great, great, great. Everything was great. Still in her cheerleader uniform, she looked up and down the hall. Seeing that it was empty, she performed a high leap, landed, and did a cartwheel that nearly carried her into the wall. Having gotten that out of her system, she collected her books, stuffed them into her backpack, and humming to herself, headed out the back door to the student parking lot. Even the weather is great today, she thought, stopping to take a deep breath. The afternoon sky was still high and cloudless. The air felt warm and dry, more like summer than a day in autumn. Near the fence, two girls sat on the hood of a car, talking to a boy in a maroon and white leather jacket. Beside them, another car revved up noisily. Two boys were puzzling over a bike with a flat rear tire, scratching their heads and scowling. Beyond the student parking lot, Shadyside Park stretched out, still green and vibrant, a broad, grassy field with an empty baseball diamond set in one corner led to thick woods. I wish Mom and Dad were home, Bobby thought. I can't wait to tell them the news. I'm still in a state of shock, she told herself. It was such a surprise. I never dreamed that Miss Green would name me captain. The other girls must have been shocked too, Bobby realized. Especially Kimmy. Kimmy. She hadn't stopped to think about Kimmy, but now the thought descended on her like a heavy cloud, bringing her back to earth. Had Kimmy come over to congratulate her? Bobby struggled to remember. She had been surrounded by everyone all at once. But no, she didn't remember Kimmy being one of them. I'd better call her or something, she thought. But then a hand touched her shoulder, startling her out of her thoughts.
Hi.
She stared into a boy's face. He was handsome, with friendly dark brown eyes that crinkled at the corners, a shy smile, and lots of unbrushed brown hair that seemed to be tossed around on his head. Hi, she returned the greeting. It was Chip Chastner, quarterback of the Tigers. She had seen him a lot during outdoor practices. He was friendly with the other cheerleaders, but he had never said a word to Bobby. He fell into step with her as she crossed the parking lot. He was broad-shouldered and tall, especially in his shoulder pads and cleats.
I just wanted to say, way to go,
he said shyly, his dark eyes smiling at her. Thanks, she said, suddenly shy too. I was really surprised. I mean, I didn't think they'd pick me, since I'm new and all.
We haven't really met. I'm Charles Chastner, he said, but everyone calls me Chip.
I know, Bobby replied, feeling her face grow hot. I think you're a really good player.
Thanks,
he beamed at her. Her compliment seemed to make him forget his shyness.
I've watched you too.
Tough game Friday night, Bobby said, watching the two boys dispiritedly walk the disabled bike away.
Yeah, Winston is always tough,
Chip said, waving to a couple girls who had just emerged from the building.
They'll probably cream us.
Bobby laughed. Wow, you've sure got confidence, she said sarcastically.
No, come on, he replied. I'm pumped for the game, but you've got to be realistic. They went to the state finals last year.
How'd you learn to throw the ball so far? Bobby asked, stopping at the edge of the parking lot, shifting her backpack on her shoulders. Just practice a lot?
Yeah, he nodded. My dad and I used to practice throwing in the backyard. We still do when he has time. He's working 2 jobs these days, so it's kind of tough.
My parents both work all the time, Bobby told him. But I'm usually at cheerleading practice or studying, so I wouldn't see them much, even if they were home.
I guess my dad got me my first football when I was 5,
Chip said, leaning against the parking lot fence. The wind ruffled his thick brown hair, his dark eyes studying Bobby as he talked.
He loves football, but he never had the chance to play. Always had to work, so I guess he wanted to do his playing through me.
That can be a lot of pressure, Bobby said thoughtfully. Chip's expression hardened.
I can handle it,
he said softly. I just meant, Bobby started, surprised by his abrupt answer.
Are you going out with anyone or anything?
Chip interrupted. Caught off guard by the change of subject, Bobby hesitated. No, she finally managed to reply. Are you? He shook his head.
No, not anymore. Want to meet me after the Winstead game?
He stared at her intently.
We could go get a pizza, hang out with some other guys.
Great, Bobby replied. Sounds good.
Well, okay, excellent.
He glanced up at the clock over the back door of the school.
I've got to practice,
he said, pushing away from the fence.
After the game, wait for me outside the stadium locker room, okay?
He didn't wait for her reply. Instead, he slipped his helmet on and began jogging toward the practice field across from the baseball diamond, taking long, easy strides. What an amazing day, Bobby thought, watching him as he ran. So many good things happening at once. She shook her head, somewhat dazed by it all. Her next thought was, I'll probably be hit by a truck on the way home. The next evening, a warm, almost balmy Thursday night, Bobby finished her dinner, then hurried to Jennifer's house to study. Since the accident, she and Jennifer had become close. Unlike some of the other girls who wanted to shut the accident out of their minds and forget it had ever happened, Bobby had visited Jennifer in the hospital every day. Bobby had been touched by her new friend's bravery and serenity. Soon, she and Jennifer were talking easily, sharing their thoughts and feelings as if they had been longtime friends. Bobby parked her car on the street and made her way up the smooth asphalt drive. Jennifer lived in a sprawling modern ranch house in North Hills, the wealthiest section of Shadyside. What a contrast to Fear Street, Bobby thought wistfully, her eyes taking in the manicured lawns, raked clean, and the well-cared-for houses. The streetlights flickered on as Miss Daly opened the door to her.
Oh, hi, Bobby,
she said, looking tired and drawn in the pale porch light.
Jennifer's waiting for you in the den.
Bobby eagerly made her way across the carpeted living room and its low, sleek furniture of chrome and white leather and into the small den, closing the door behind her. Did you talk to Kimmy? She asked Jennifer, skipping any greeting. Jennifer was seated in her wheelchair between two red leather couches that faced each other. She was wearing navy blue sweats, the sweatshirt sleeves rolled up above her elbow. Her red-brown hair was tied behind her head in a single braid. She had a textbook in her lap. I talked to her, she replied, her face expressionless. Slowly, a smile spread across her full lips. She's coming back. Oh, good, Bobby said, breathing a long sigh. She dropped her backpack on the checkered tile floor and plopped down in the red couch on Jennifer's right. I can't believe I didn't even notice that she had run out. You were a little excited, Jennifer said dryly. But I should have known Kimmy would be upset, Bobby insisted, rubbing her hand against the smooth leather of the couch arm. But I didn't see her. I didn't see anything. It was all so... She didn't finish her thought. Anyway, I talked to her, Jennifer said, wheeling herself closer until she was right in front of Bobby. She's not a happy camper, but I got her to come around. Her mouth fell into an unhappy pout. She avoided Bobby's eyes. Kimmy and I used to be so close, but not anymore. I'm really sorry, Bobby said quickly. If it's my fault, No, it isn't, Jennifer interrupted. You didn't do anything, really. How did you get her to come back on the squad? Bobby asked. I told her we needed her. I said, what would happen if Bobby fell and broke her leg? And what did she say? Bobby wondered. She asked if I would put that in writing, Jennifer replied. Both girls burst out laughing. Kimmy isn't your biggest fan, Jennifer said. Well, duh, Bobby replied, rolling her eyes, imitating her little brother Sean. Well, duh was Sean's favorite expression. Well, I'm glad she's not quitting, Bobby said. Really? Why? Jennifer demanded, closing the textbook on her lap and tossing it onto the couch opposite Bobby. Because it would make me feel really bad, Bobby said with emotion. Jennifer snickered. Having her around might make you feel a lot worse, Bobby. She won't talk to you, you know that, and she'll probably try to turn the other girls against you. I'm sure she's been on the phone night and day with those two pals of hers, Deborah and Ronnie. Bobby sighed and pulled both hands back through her hair. You know, it's only a cheerleading squad. It's supposed to be fun. Tell that to Kimmy, Jennifer said softly. She shifted her weight in her wheelchair. Ow! Are you okay? Bobby asked, leaning forward, preparing to jump up if her friend needed help of some kind. Fine, yeah. Jennifer forced a smile. Let's change the subject, okay? Yeah, okay. Bobby settled back on the couch. Do you know Charles Chassner? Chip? Sure. Jennifer's smile broadened. Chip is a real babe.
I've had a crush on him since 3rd grade. He's cut her now, though. He asked me out for tomorrow after the game, Bobby confided. Jennifer's eyes widened in surprise. Huh? Chip? Bobby nodded. Yeah, he asked me out yesterday after the pep rally. Really? Bobby was startled to see Jennifer's eyes narrow and her features tighten. Jennifer glared at Bobby. You didn't say yes, did you?
Chapter 10. Horror in the Hall. Jen, what's wrong? Bobby asked. Jennifer shook her head, then locked her eyes on Bobby's. Don't you know that Chip is Kimmy's boyfriend? Huh? Bobby's mouth dropped open in shock. She suddenly could feel the blood pulsing at her temples. I mean, he was Kimmy's boyfriend, Jennifer said, gripping the sides of the wheelchair. Until a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks? Yeah, Jennifer frowned. Then he dumped her, just like that, after more than 2 years. Oh my gosh. Bobby slumped down in the soft leather couch. She seemed to deflate. The shock of this news made her feel weak. She'll think Chip dumped her for you. Jennifer finished the thought for her. Bobby moaned. One more reason for Kimmy to hate my guts. They stared at each other in silence for a while. Jennifer squeaked her wheelchair back and forth on the floor. Finally, Kimmy asked, What should I do? Jennifer shrugged. I don't know. He's really cute.
Girls, how about getting up a little energy?
Miss Green said. It was more of a complaint than a question, and she said the words with disgust. Having blown her whistle and stepped onto the floor to interpret the practice, she did an imitation of the way they looked to her, moving her arms and legs in weary slow motion, her eyes half closed, her mouth drooping open. The cheerleaders watched in sullen silence. Bobby felt embarrassed. She was leading the practice, after all. It was her job to get the girls to show some spirit, not Miss Green. But Bobby was finding it difficult to get some of the girls to listen to her, even though it was the last practice before the game that night. Kimmy had done a good job of turning the girls against Bobby. It hadn't been hard, Bobby realized unhappily. The girls had all known Kimmy for years. Bobby was a newcomer, an intruder. Most of the cheerleaders hadn't wanted to allow the Corcorans on the squad in the first place, and now here was Bobby giving them instructions, leading them, or trying to lead them, trying to get them to cooperate.
When you do steam heat like that,
Miss Green was scolding them,
it makes me think your boiler's broken.
It was supposed to be a joke, but it fell flat on the spirited squad. No one even cracked a smile. Standing beside Miss Green, Bobby let her eyes wander down the row of girls. She stopped at Kimmy, who was glaring at her. Her eyes narrowed. Kimmy's stare was so hard, so cold, it forced Bobby to look away. The gym doors opened, and Jennifer wheeled herself in, smiling at Bobby. She made her way silently along the far wall, her maroon and white pennant on her lap, her backpack attached to her wheelchair. Bobby wished Jennifer hadn't come. She felt embarrassed to have Jennifer show up while the girls were being lectured by Miss Green. Jennifer would see that Bobby didn't have control, that the girls weren't with her. She knew Jennifer would be sympathetic. She was Bobby's best friend, after all, but it was still embarrassing. Bobby felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Corky, who gave her an encouraging smile and then quickly resumed her place. Bobby took a deep breath. Okay, guys, she shouted, clapping her hands enthusiastically and moving in front of Miss Green. Let's try it again. Let's really get steamed up. She saw Kimmy roll her eyes and sarcastically mutter something to Deborah. Then the girls lined up and began the steam heat routine, this time with a little more enthusiasm than before. It was great. Ronnie was out of step for the entire last part of it, but Bobby didn't think it was worth making them do it again. As the routine ended with a cheer and a spread eagle, she turned to see Jennifer and Miss Green talking heatedly near the wall. Miss Green was leaning over the wheelchair, close to Jennifer's ear. Both of them were shaking their heads as they spoke. Are they talking about me? Kimmy wondered, dread building in the pit of her stomach. Is Miss Green complaining about me? About how I haven't been able to win over the girls? Are we finished? Kimmy's shrill question made Bobby turn back to the line of girls. Yeah, I guess, Bobby said distractedly. Well, can we go? Kimmy asked impatiently. I mean, the game's in a few hours. We have to go home and have dinner and everything, don't we? Kimmy was making no attempt to hide her dislike of Bobby. To her dismay, Bobby saw that some of the other girls seemed to adopt Kimmy's attitude. They all agree with her, Bobby thought, her head suddenly pounding, her temples throbbing. They probably all think that Kimmy should be captain, not me. And now even Jennifer and Miss Green are talking about me. We'll meet here in the gym at 7, Bobby announced dispiritedly, avoiding their eyes by glancing up at the scoreboard clock. Ronnie will be in charge of equipment. Ronnie rolled her eyes and cast a glance at Kimmy. No fire batons tonight, Bobby announced. That routine needs a lot more work. We'll try it for homecoming next week. The girls picked up their belongings and quickly made their way out of the gym. Bobby stood in the middle of the floor, her shoulders slumped, feeling discouraged, watching the girls exit. I thought it went a lot better that last time, Corky said, offering an encouraging smile. Liar, Bobby muttered. Corky shrugged. No, really. Thanks, Bobby said dryly, watching Jennifer and Miss Green still talking animatedly. You coming straight home? Corky bent to scratch one knee. Her hair was damp from perspiration. At least one cheerleader is really trying, Bobby thought miserably. Go on without me, she told her sister. I've got to get all my stuff. Giving her a quick, playful salute, Corky obediently headed to the door. With a sigh, Bobby turned and saw that Jennifer and Miss Green had disappeared into the advisor's office in the corner. She pulled the whistle from around her neck and, swinging it by its cord, began walking slowly toward the door. Being cheerleader captain is supposed to be fun, she thought regretfully. Well, she told herself, I'll find a way to win them over. Maybe even Kimmy. Once again she remembered Kimmy's cold stare and shuddered. She stepped into the hallway, which was empty and silent. Her sneakers squeaked along the hard floor. She turned a corner, climbed the stair to the first floor, and headed to her locker to collect her books and jacket. The long corridor stretched before her like a tunnel. The lights had been dimmed to save energy. Gray lockers lined both walls. The classrooms were dark and empty. Bobby coughed, the sound echoing through the long tunnel. The loud crash behind her made her jump and cry out. She spun around in time to see a locker door swing open, then slam shut. Oh! Another crash in front of her. She turned to see 2 lockers against the right wall swinging open. As she stared in disbelief, 2 more lockers pulled open. The doors seemed to hesitate, then slammed shut with deafening force. Her mouth open in a silent cry. Bobby gaped in astonishment. Doors slammed, then swung open again. Bang, bang. The sound echoed until it became a terrifying roar. Bang, bang. Both rows of locker doors swung open at once, as if pulled by invisible hands. No, Bobby cried. This isn't happening. I'm imagining this. Her heart pounding, she dropped the whistle and began to run, past swinging, slamming locker doors, through the echoing sound, a barrage like gunfire. No, stop! The wall of lockers on her left swung open in unison, then slammed shut with deafening crash. No, please! She held her hands over her ears and ran, and then she heard the screams. A girl, screaming in horror, high-pitched, shrill screams of anguish, of pain. "Who's there?" Bobby wondered, running between the slamming lockers. "Who is it?" The girl screamed again, the sound rising above the thunder of the lockers. And again, Bobby's sneakers pounded against the floor. She ran blindly through the dark hallway, locker door swinging open, then slamming shut on both sides of her. Another scream of agony. Bobby reached the end of the corridor, turned the corner, and stared in surprise. Chapter 11. Who was screaming? No one there. The front hall was deserted. Silence. "Hello?" Bobby called. No reply. No screams. The only sound now was that of her loud, gasping breaths. "Hello? Anyone there?" She called out in a hoarse, choked voice. Silence. No one. Confused and frightened, her hands pressed tightly to her burning cheeks, Bobby turned back and peered cautiously down the long, dim corridor. The dark lockers along the walls were all shut tight. Her ears rang from the crashing, banging sounds they had made. But now they stood still and silent. She took a reluctant step, then another, expecting them to fly open again, to begin their frightening symphony. Silence. No lockers banging. No girl screaming in terror. Her legs trembled. Bobby made her way to her locker. She opened the combination lock with a shaking hand and pulled the door open. She glanced down the hall, still silent and empty. The silence seemed to echo in her mind. Am I cracking up? Am I totally losing it? She pulled out the things she needed, stuffed them into her backpack, locked the door, and ran. At home, in the upstairs room they shared, Corky didn't believe her. "You're very tired," she said sympathetically from her desk, where she was trying to cram in a little homework before she had to leave for the game. "You don't believe me!" Bobby shrieked, immediately angry at herself for not keeping her cool. Corky stared at her sister thoughtfully. Locker doors flying open. "I know it sounds crazy," Bobby started. "The hall was dark, right?" Corky interrupted, tapping her pencil against her open textbook. "It was late. You were tired. Practice was rough. You're nervous about the game tonight." Bobby started to protest, then changed her mind. With a loud sigh, she tossed herself onto her bed. "I wouldn't believe me either," she muttered softly. "I wouldn't—" She stopped and gasped in horror, staring across the room. Corky followed her sister's frightened gaze. Both girls watched in silent terror as the closet door swung open. Chapter 12. Chip is buried. It's happening again," Bobby uttered, her voice a choked whisper. Corky raised her hands to her face, her eyes wide with fear, and stared open-mouthed as the closet door continued to move. And Sean stepped out. A triumphant grin spread across his face, his eyes sparkling with evil glee. "Hi," he said, giving them a nonchalant wave. "Oh!" Bobby jumped up, her hands balling into fists at her side. "You little creep!" Corky screamed. She grabbed Sean by the neck and pretended to choke him. He collapsed to his knees in a fit of giggles. "How long have you been in the closet?" Bobby demanded, joining Corky in holding him down on the floor. "It wasn't me. It was a ghost," he said. Both girls began tickling him furiously. "Ow, ow, ow!" he cried, squirming and laughing. All three of them were laughing hysterically now, wrestling on the floor. Digging her fingers into Sean's bony ribs, Bobby glanced up at the clock. "Oh!" She rolled away and stood up.
Come on, Corky. We've got to eat dinner and change. We'll be late for the game. Corky gave Sean one last hard tickle, then climbed to her feet. Shadyside's going to lose, Sean called after them, following them downstairs. Shadyside stinks! The excitement of the game, the cheers of the Shadyside fans who filled the stadium, the white lights cutting through the chill of the night, making the field brighter than daylight under the starless black sky, forced all thoughts of the afternoon from Bobby's mind.
Tigers growl, tigers roar, do it again, more, more, more.
Across the field, the Winstead High cheerleaders in their blue and gold uniforms were clapping and cheering, rousing the few hundred Winstead fans in the away team bleachers. Their cries barely carried over the cheers and shouts that roared down from the Shadyside supporters, and the loud blasts and drum rolls from the Shadyside marching band in their own bleachers near the end zone.
Tigers roar, tigers growl, we want a touchdown now, now, now!
Her eyes darted back and forth from the game on the field to the crowd in the stadium. Bobby led the girls through their cheers. They were on stage now, in full view of everyone. The bitterness and rivalries that had created so much ill feeling in practice were all forgotten. Bobby was in charge, and no one questioned her commands. She called out the cheers and routines they were to perform as she carefully watched the action on the field.
Go team, go team, go, 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 go!
The cheers thundered down from the stadium, punctuated by applause and excited shouts. Bobby glanced quickly down the line of cheerleaders, catching a smile of encouragement from Corky at the far end. Before the game, Ronnie had complained that she wasn't feeling well, that she thought she was coming down with the flu. But Bobby saw that she was giving 100%, cheering with her usual enthusiasm. At the far end of the players' bench, Bobby spotted Jennifer. She was in her wheelchair, a maroon blanket over her lap, waving the Shadyside pennant. Their eyes met. Jennifer, smiling happily, waved. Bobby waved back. Whistles blew on the field. Bobby heard laughter spread across the stadium bleachers. She turned to see the cause of the interruption. A white, wire-haired terrier had run onto the field. Two Shadyside players were trying to chase it to the sidelines, but the dog, enjoying the attention, ran in wide circles, its stub of a tail wagging furiously. Finally, one of the referees managed to pick the dog up. He jogged the sidelines with it to a loud chorus of good-natured boos. Then whistles rang out for the game to resume. Bobby stared over the heads of the players on the bench, watching Chip lead the offense out of the huddle. The first quarter had been pretty even. Both teams had been able to move the ball, although neither team had scored. Now, as the second quarter began, the Tigers were starting on the Winstead 35-yard line. Good field position. The cheers grew louder. The noise level in the stadium rose as if someone had turned up the volume control. Watching Chip step behind the center, Bobby wondered what he was thinking. Was he thinking about the Winstead linemen staring at him from under their helmets, about to come charging toward him? Was he thinking only about the play he had called? Was he nervous? Was he scared to death? She decided she'd have to ask him these questions when she met him after the game. After the game. She forced that thought out of her mind. She couldn't think about that now. She had to concentrate, stay alert, stay on the ball. She heard Chip call out the signals from his loud, high-pitched voice. Then she saw him take the snap from center. He took a few steps back. He raised his arms to throwing position. Another step back, his arms ready to throw. The crowd roared. Bobby held her breath. Chip seemed to freeze, his arms cocked, his feet planted firmly on the grass. He stood there until two Winstead tacklers swarmed over him and pushed him to the ground. Bobby realized
she had been holding her breath the whole time. She exhaled, turned to the cheerleaders, and called out a clapper cheer. What had happened to Chip? She wondered. Moving in line and clapping. The crowd responded half-heartedly. The cheer was drowned out by muttering and heated voices. People in the stands must be asking the same question, she realized. Chip had had plenty of time to throw, but he hadn't even pumped his arm. He didn't seem to be looking for a receiver, and he hadn't tried to scramble away when the line came crashing in on him. Oh, well, thought Bobby, it's just one play. She and the cheerleaders finished the cheer and turned back to the game. Some of the players on the bench had climbed to their feet, so Bobby had to move closer to see the playing field. The stadium grew quiet as Chip stepped up to the center, quiet enough for Bobby to hear the Winstead cheerleaders on the far side of the field. Again, Bobby held her breath as Chip took the ball and stepped back. It appeared to be a running play. Dave Johnson, the Tigers' big running back, came crunching forward, his arms outstretched. But again, Chip froze in place. He didn't hand off the ball. Johnson ran past him into the line. Chip stood with the ball in his hands. He didn't run or step back to pass. "Oh!" Bobby cried out as Chip was tackled hard around the knees and dropped for a loss. Voices in the stadium bleachers cried out in surprise. The entire stadium seemed to buzz. Bobby heard a scattering of boos. She shook her head hard as if trying to force the play from her mind. "Let's do Go Tigers!" she called out. The girls lined up quickly, except for Kimmy, who remained just behind the players' bench, staring onto the field. "Kimmy!" Bobby called, but Kimmy didn't seem to hear her. She was staring straight ahead with the strangest expression on her face. "Kimmy!" Bobby repeated, but it was too late to do the cheer anyway. Chip was leading the team out of the huddle for the third down play. Again, the stadium grew quiet. The wind suddenly picked up, blowing the flag and the big Shadyside pennant beneath it on the pole, making them flap noisily, the rope clips clanging against the metal flagpole. "Come on, Chip," Bobby thought, crossing her fingers. Across the field, the cheerleaders in blue and gold were standing in a tight line, staring in rapt silence at the field. Chip took the ball from the center. Johnson came rolling toward him, but Chip kept the ball. It was a fake run. Chip backpedaled quickly and started to roll out. "Throw it!" Bobby screamed, cupping her hands to form a megaphone.
Throw it!
Chip stopped. He froze.
Throw it! Throw it!
Chip didn't move. He was holding the ball at his waist.
Throw it!
Shadyside players were shouting to him.
I'm open! I'm open!
Johnson was yelling downfield. Chip was frozen like a statue. Bobby's mouth dropped open in a silent cry as she saw the Winstead players close in on him. Several tacklers got to him at the same time. The ball dribbled out of Chip's hand as they covered him, pulled him down, and piled on top of him. Players scrambled for the ball. Whistles blew. The stadium remained strangely silent. "They buried him," Bobby heard Kimmy say. Buried him. Bobby moved closer to the sidelines, stepping in front of the players' bench. The Winstead players were slowly climbing off Chip, making their way triumphantly to their bench across the field. Buried him. Buried him. Bobby suddenly felt cold all over. The tacklers were all gone now, but Chip, sprawled flat on his back, wasn't getting up. Chapter 13. I was dead. Bobby showered and changed quickly into a green turtleneck sweater and a short, straight black skirt, which she pulled over green tights. She brushed her hair, frowning at herself in the water-spotted locker room mirror. Feeling excited, she made her way out of the room, calling out goodnight to the few girls who were still there. As she half walked, half jogged back outside to the football team's locker room, she relived that second quarter nightmare, seeing the scene repeat in her mind. There was Chip, frozen in place, and there were the Winstead tacklers swarming over him. And there was Chip out cold on the ground, sprawled so flat, so still. And then there came the stretchers, the worried coach and players forming a tight circle around their fallen quarterback, and then Chip being carried away under the bright, too bright, stadium lights. Bobby saw his hand dangling limply, lifelessly, over the sides of the stretcher, saw that his eyes were closed, his head tilted at such a strange angle. He's dead, she thought. It was so silent in the stadium, so unearthly silent. We're all dead. All. But then whistles blew. The game resumed.
Chastner injured on the play.
The stadium announcer informed everyone. Old news already. The voices came back, the cheers and shouts. The band revived, blaring out the Tigers' fight song, the tubas punctuating each beat with a ruckus blat. Bobby, feeling shaken and stunned, called out the cheers. Somehow, she knew she had to keep going. But is he okay? She wondered. Is he okay? Winstead scored quickly. The Tigers came back with Overman, Chip's backup. They tried some running plays that didn't work. After 3 plays, they had to punt. Again, Bobby heard scattered boos. The cheerleaders across the field were leaping high, shouting with renewed enthusiasm. Is he okay? Is Chip okay? The game lost all interest for her. She called out cheers, kept the routines going, all on automatic pilot. Word on the bench was that Chip had probably suffered a mild concussion and was feeling fine now. Everyone was very relieved. She saw that he didn't come out for the second half. Did they take him to the hospital? Bobby wondered. Is he still in the locker room? Does he still expect me to meet him? The Tigers lost 21-6. And now here she was, nervously waiting in the student parking lot, in front of the door to the team dressing room. The stadium lights dimmed, then went out, casting the stadium, the parking lot, the entire back of the school, into sudden night. As if someone had turned off the sun, Bobby thought. As her eyes adjusted to the new darkness, she saw Deborah and Ronnie heading across the parking lot. Involved in a conversation, they didn't notice her. Bobby watched them disappear around the corner, both of them talking animatedly, gesturing with their hands. Strange that Kimmy isn't with them, she thought. Maybe Kimmy had a date. The locker room door swung open. Bobby recognized Dave Johnson, the running back. He came bouncing out, carrying a small knapsack, his hair still wet from the shower. Is he in there? Bobby stammered.
Yeah, he's coming out, Johnson told her.
Is he okay?
Bobby asked, but Johnson was already halfway across the rapidly emptying parking lot. Bobby started to shout after him, but the door opened again and Chip appeared. He moved forward unsteadily, smiling at her, his face pale, almost bloodless under the parking lot lights. He was wearing faded jeans and a shady side leather jacket that he had snapped up to the collar. Hi, he called. How's it going? His smile was forced, she saw. His eyes weren't quite focusing on her. Are you okay? She blurted. The question seemed to catch him off guard. I'm not sure, he replied, wrinkling his forehead. He stepped closer to her. What happened? Bobby asked. I was, worried. Me too. She waited for him to say more, but his face fell into a thoughtful, faraway stare. So what happened? I mean, you're okay? I guess, he said slowly. Maybe a slight concussion. That's what they said. I'm supposed to go right home. I feel kind of funny. Oh,
She couldn't hide her disappointment from her voice. I have a car, she said. Can I give you a lift?
Yeah, that would be great. My parents are out of town. Actually, I'm glad my mom wasn't at the game. She worries.
Do you feel kind of weird?
Yeah, he nodded. Kind of, spacey.
It looked so scary when you didn't get up, Bobby said, leading the way to her parents' Accord, which was parked around the front on the street. Were you knocked out?
I guess.
He put a hand on her shoulder, as if he needed to steady himself as he walked. She slowed down. He waved to a couple of players from the team. Did it hurt? She asked.
No, not really.
Am I asking too many questions? She asked. He didn't reply. Wow, this is going great, Bobby thought unhappily. I'm asking question after question, and he's staring off into space. He can barely walk or even answer me. They made their way in silence to the car. She unlocked the passenger door and held the door open as he slid into the front seat. A few seconds later, she started up the car and turned on the headlights. I don't know where you live, she said, turning to him, adjusting her shoulder seatbelt.
It was like I was dead, he replied.
She stared into his eyes. Huh?
It was like I was paralyzed or something. I couldn't get my body to move, to do anything.
He turned his eyes to the windshield. A group of kids crossed in front of the car. One of them tapped on the hood as he passed. Chip, are you feeling okay? Should I call your parents or something? She asked, feeling a stab of worry in the pit of her stomach.
Well, aren't you wondering why I didn't pass the ball? Or hand it off? He asked heatedly. Isn't that what everyone wants to know?
The doctor said you had a concussion, right? Bobby said, a little frightened. She started to pull away from the curb, but he stopped her, placing his hand over hers. His hand was ice cold.
Before I got the concussion, he said more quietly. Before, when I was playing, I wanted to throw the ball, but it was like I had no control, like I was paralyzed or something. Just for that moment.
I don't understand, Bobby said, shaking her head. Oncoming headlights filled the car with light. Bobby and Chip both shielded their eyes. A car roared by filled with Shadyside kids, all the windows down, everyone singing along to a blaring radio.
I couldn't hand it off either,
Chip said. She realized he was explaining it to himself. She wondered if he even cared whether she was in the car.
I didn't freeze. I just wasn't there. I mean, I was, and I wasn't. I knew where I was, but I couldn't move.
Chip? Bobby started, reaching again for the gear shift. They still hadn't moved from the curb. Maybe we'd better... He startled her by turning in the seat, leaning toward her and grabbing her shoulders with both of his hands. Chip, she began.
I'm kind of scared,
he said, his eyes wild and unfocused, his face closer and closer to hers.
I'm really kind of scared.
And then he pulled her down to him and started to kiss her. His lips felt hard and dry against hers. His hands held onto her shoulders, pulled her to him. Bobby started to pull away, but he seemed so needy, so frightened. Returning his kiss, she raised her hands to his wrists and removed them from her shoulders. Then she slid her hands around the back of his neck. To her surprise, he was trembling all over. The kiss ended as suddenly as it had begun. Chip, his expression a little embarrassed, leaned back against his seat.
Sorry,
That's okay, Bobby replied, realizing her heart was pounding.
Maybe we'd better get me home,
Chip said, avoiding her eyes, staring out the passenger window, which was beginning to steam up.
I just feel so weird.
Okay. Bobby put the gear shift into drive and pulled away from the curb. As he directed her to his house on Canyon Road, she repeatedly glanced over at him. He seemed to flicker on and off in the light of the passing streetlights, so pale, so ghostly pale, and worried looking. "Bobby, what happened to me tonight?" he whispered, staring out of the passenger window. Bobby had no reply. Chapter 14. Kimmy has a problem.
Bobby, can I talk to you?
Kimmy came bounding across the gym before practice on Monday afternoon, her cheeks flushed, her eyes angry. "I just got here," Bobby said distractedly, searching the gym. Everyone seemed to be ready. Megan and Heather were already working on one of the new routines. Miss Green was standing behind her desk in her office, talking on the phone.
"Sorry I'm late,"
Bobby called to the others.
"I really need to talk to you,"
Kimmy insisted, hands on her waist. Her black crimped hair was more disheveled than usual. The sleeves of her sweater were rolled up, one above the elbow, the other below. Bobby waved to Corky. She tossed her backpack against the wall. "What about Kimmy?" she asked impatiently. "I've had the worst day. First, I forgot about the chemistry quiz, then
"About Chip,"
Kimmy said, through clenched teeth. Bobby's eyes widened in surprise. She could feel her face growing hot. "Chip? What about him?" Kimmy glared at her. "Well, what about him?"
"You made a little mistake, Bobby,"
Kimmy said, tapping her sneaker nervously on the gym floor, like a thumping rabbit foot. One hand played with the silver megaphone pendant she always wore around her neck. "Huh?"
"Chip is my boyfriend,"
Kimmy said heatedly. Bobby glared past Kimmy and saw that the other girls had stopped their practicing and were standing around staring with unconcealed interest at this unpleasant confrontation. "Could we talk about this after practice?" Bobby asked, gesturing to the audience they had attracted.
"No way,"
Kimmy insisted, fingering the silver pendant.
"Chip is my boyfriend. We've been going together for a long time. Ask anyone."
She gestured back to the other girls, who shifted uncomfortably and avoided Bobby's eyes. "Kimmy, listen," Bobby said quietly, backing away.
"You made a little mistake, Bobby. A little mistake,"
Kimmy repeated, raising her voice, following Bobby, moving very close to her. Bobby felt herself losing her temper. What right did Kimmy have to do this to her? She was only trying to embarrass Bobby in front of the other cheerleaders. She was only trying to turn the girls against Bobby even more. "You're the one who made the mistake," Bobby blurted out. "You're forgetting one little detail, Kimmy. I didn't ask Chip out. He asked me." Kimmy's eyes grew wide. Then, uttering a cry of anger, she lunged at Bobby, grabbing the sides of her hair with both hands, pulling hard. Startled, Bobby gasped. She tried to duck out of Kimmy's hold, but Kimmy had a firm grasp on her hair. Bobby yelped in pain and struggled to pull Kimmy's hands off. Suddenly, a voice was calling,
"Stop! Girls, stop, please!"
and Jennifer wheeled her chair right between the two combatants.
"Stop it! Please! Kimmy! Bobby!"
Both girls stumbled backward. Surprised to see Jennifer appear out of nowhere, they hesitated, panting noisily. Bobby's head throbbed. She raised a hand and tried to smooth her hair.
"Girls, what's going on?"
Miss Green came trotting out of her office, a look of alarm on her face.
"I was on the phone, and when I looked up,
"It's okay,"
Jennifer told her, backing her wheelchair up, her eyes on Bobby.
"A slight disagreement."
good Lord!"
Miss Green cried, staring first at Bobby, then at Kimmy, who had bent down to pick the silver megaphone pendant up off the ground. Embarrassed and upset, Bobby stared at the bleachers at the other end of the gym. Taking in big gulps of air, she struggled to catch her breath. Her throat felt as dry as cotton. Kimmy fiddled with the clasp of the pendant chain. her hands shaking visibly. Her face was crimson, and a damp clump of her hair had fallen over one eye.
I think you two had better apologize to each other right now,
Miss Green said sternly, talking to them as if they were 4-year-olds. Neither girl replied. Jennifer backed her wheelchair out of the way. Kimmy fastened the megaphone pendant around her neck, glaring at Bobby as she did it.
This is very bad timing,
Miss Green said, crossing her arms in front of her chest.
especially since you two have to work together so closely on the new routine.
The new routine. Bobby had forgotten they were going to work on the new routine. She sighed. The new routine was long and difficult, and it ended with Kimmy doing a pike diving off Corky's shoulders and being caught by Bobby. Maybe we should practice something easier today, Bobby muttered glumly.
We're not practicing anything until you and Kimmy apologize to each other for acting like spoiled babies,
Miss Green said, frowning. Bobby glanced past Miss Green at the other girls. Corky was making funny faces at her. Helpful. Very helpful. The other girls all looked terribly uncomfortable. Deborah and Ronnie had gone back to practicing their splits. They were pretending that the little drama wasn't taking place.
There's nothing to apologize about,
Kimmy said defiantly. Nothing to apologize about? Bobby thought, rolling her eyes. She attacked me.
Well, if you really feel that way,
Miss Green said angrily, her arms still crossed,
I'll have no choice but to suspend both of you from the squad.
A few of the girls gasped. Ronnie and Deborah stopped their exercises.
Well,
Kimmy said slowly, avoiding Bobby's eyes. I'm willing to apologize, Bobby said softly, even though this is entirely Kimmy's fault, she added to herself.
I guess I am too,
Kimmy said grudgingly, her blue eyes flashing.
I should hope so,
the advisor said, lowering her arms.
After all, this is a cheerleading squad, not the wrestling team.
Bobby glanced at Jennifer, who had backed up nearly to the wall. Jennifer flashed Bobby an encouraging smile.
I'm sorry,
Kimmy said sullenly and extended her hand. Bobby took her hand. It felt hot and wet. I'm sorry too, she said softly.
That's better, Miss Green said, more than a little relieved. I'm sure you girls can find more civilized way to work out your differences.
Bobby and Kimmy both nodded. Bobby let go of Kimmy's hand. The two eyed each other warily. Kimmy will never be my friend, Bobby realized. Her next thought, will she always be my enemy?
This new routine is so tricky,
Miss Green was saying.
So complicated. The timing is split second. You two girls have to be able to rely on each other. You have to have confidence in each other.
She called the other cheerleaders over to begin the practice. Bobby wasn't in the mood to work on anything new. She still felt strange, out of sorts. How could Kimmy have attacked her like that? Didn't she have any pride?
Let's try the last part of the routine first,
Miss Green suggested.
Why don't you explain it again, Bobby?
Actually, Corky should explain it, Bobby replied, turning to her sister. Corky invented it. We used it at state finals last year, and it really got a big reaction. Bobby saw Kimmy mutter something to Deborah. Both girls snickered quietly to themselves. It's easier to demonstrate it, Corky said. Bobby, do a shoulder stand. We'll do this now without the rest of the pyramid, but in the real routine, she'd be up much higher. We'll show you how the pike works. Miss Green, will you catch Bobby when she dives? Bobby and Miss Green obediently moved into place as the other girls watched intently.
You'll be doing this pike, Kimmy, Miss Green said. So watch carefully. If you have any questions,
I'm watching, Kimmy said sharply. Bobby stepped behind Corky and grabbed Corky's hands. Then she placed one sneaker on Corky's bent knee and, with a boost from Heather, who was standing right behind her, raised her other sneaker to Corky's shoulder and pulled herself up until she was standing on Corky's shoulders. Corky brought her hands up to Bobby's ankles, gripping them tightly, locking her in place. Miss Green moved in front of Corky and readied herself to catch Bobby as she dove. "Ready, Bobby?" Corky asked, keeping her shoulders steady, bracing herself. "Here goes," Bobby said. She leapt off of Corky's shoulders, bringing her feet up, folding her body into a perfect V and dropping in a sitting position right into Miss Green's waiting arms. Some of the girls burst into enthusiastic applause.
Excellent,
Miss Green cried as Bobby lowered her feet to the floor.
You really make it look easy.
"We've practiced a lot," Bobby said modestly.
Kimmy, are you ready to try it?
Miss Green asked.
"I guess so,"
Kimmy said reluctantly, eyeing Bobby.
Bobby will catch you. Run through it slowly,
Miss Green instructed as Kimmy stepped behind Corky.
Take as long as it takes. Don't worry about the number of beats. We'll practice the timing later.
The girls who were not involved in this part of the routine stepped back to make room. Ronnie was talking excitedly to two of them, shaking her head, glancing at Bobby.
"I really don't believe this. My life is in your hands,"
Kimmy told Bobby dryly. "No problem," Bobby replied. "I haven't dropped anyone in weeks." Kimmy didn't smile at Bobby's joke. Corky braced herself. Kimmy pulled herself up quickly into a standing position on her shoulders. Corky grabbed her calves to brace her. Bobby moved into a position to catch Kimmy. "I'm ready whenever you are," she called up to her. "Shouldn't she go on a diet first?" Deborah cracked. Kimmy glared down at her. "Since when do you make jokes?" Deborah shrugged. "Ronnie made me say it."
Let's get serious, girls, Miss Green scolded. This stunt could really be dangerous.
"Corky and I have done it 1,000,000 times," Bobby reassured her, looking up at Kimmy. "Ready?"
"I guess,"
Kimmy replied with a shrug.
"Wish I had a safety net."
"You can do it!" Jennifer yelled encouragement from against the wall. "Okay, on 3, Corky said. 1, 2, Bobby braced herself, spreading her feet far apart in preparation for the catch. She arched her back and started to raise both arms above her head. 3! Bobby sucked in a mouthful of air. Her arms, she thought. What's wrong? What's happening to me? I can't raise my arms, Bobby thought, frozen in horror. I can't move. I can't move anything. She could feel beads of cold sweat run down her forehead. Stop, Bobby thought. You've got to stop this. Hold everything. Please, just stop. But to her horror, she couldn't speak out. She couldn't make a sound. I can't move. I can't speak. She strained to raise her arms, to get into position. No, please, no, Bobby cried. Only no sound came out. What is happening to me? She could see herself standing there, as if she had floated out of her own body. She could see herself looking up as Kimmy prepared to dive, looking up with her arms still at her sides, unable to move them, to raise them, unable to catch Kimmy, unable to warn her. No, please, Kimmy, don't dive! Don't dive! Can't you see I'm paralyzed here? Can't you see something is holding me here, holding me in its grip, holding me so I can't move a single muscle, cannot even blink? Can't you see? Corky's shoulders bobbed under Kimmy's weight as Kimmy bent her knees and began her jump. No, no, Kimmy, don't! Kimmy's eyes narrowed, her features tight in intent concentration, her knees bent, the muscles tightened. No, stop, Kimmy, stop! I can't catch you. I can't even move to break your fall. Kimmy, please. Kimmy took a deep breath, held it, and then she leapt off Corky's shoulders. Chapter 15. The Accusations Fly. Kimmy hit the floor hard. She landed first on her knees and elbows. Everyone heard a sickening crack, and then a heavy thud as her forehead smacked against the floor. Her head snapped back, and her mouth let out a whoosh, like air escaping a blown-out tire.
and then her eyes closed and she didn't move. At first, everyone seemed as paralyzed as Bobby. But then Heather's shrill scream pierced the air, echoing off the high gym ceiling. Several other girls cried out. Corky dropped to her knees beside Kimmy's unmoving body and stared up at Bobby. Her eyes locked on Kimmy. Bobby stumbled back. 1 step. 2. She raised her hands to her cheeks. I can move, she realized. I can move again. I'm me again. Jennifer was wheeling her chair frantically toward Kimmy. Miss Green leaned over Kimmy, took her hand, slapped at it. Kimmy groaned.
She had the wind knocked out,
Miss Green announced. She raised her eyes to the girls, huddling around the fallen cheerleader.
Quick, call an ambulance. Call 911.
Megan and Heather, pale and shaken, went racing from the gym. I can move now, Bobby thought. But what happened to me?
You didn't try to catch her.
Deborah's words stung Bobby. Stepping close, Deborah pointed an accusing finger.
You didn't even try.
No. Bobby didn't know what to say. She took a step back, away from Deborah's accusing finger.
You just let her fall.
Ronnie cried shrilly. She had tears running down her cheeks.
No,
Bobby cried.
I tried, but you didn't try.
Ronnie screamed.
We saw you. We all saw you.
You just stood there,
Deborah cried angrily.
It was deliberate,
Ronnie said.
She did it deliberately.
Corky, still on her knees beside Kimmy, stared up at her sister. What happened? She mouthed the words silently. I couldn't catch her, Bobby explained, knowing how lame her words sounded. My arms. Bobby stopped. It didn't make any sense to her. How could she make it make sense to them?
You were mad at her, so you just let her fall,
Ronnie accused.
How could you?
Deborah cried. Kimmy stirred and opened her eyes.
You had the wind knocked out of you,
Miss Green said softly, still holding her hand. Kimmy groaned. Her eyes darted from face to face.
My arm,
she groaned.
Your arm?
Miss Green lowered Kimmy's hand to the floor.
The other one,
Kimmy groaned.
I can't move it. I think it's...
We heard a crack, Miss Green said. Maybe you broke it.
Kimmy tried to raise herself.
No.
Miss Green pushed her gently back down.
Don't try to get up. There's an ambulance on the way.
Oh, it hurts.
Kimmy stared up at Bobby.
You did this to me on purpose,
she said, her voice a pained whisper.
No,
Bobby protested.
You just let me fall,
Kimmy accused, wincing from the pain in her arm.
Lie back, Miss Green instructed her. You're going to be okay, dear. You're going to be just fine. Don't worry about Bobby now, okay?
She glanced up at Bobby, and her expression became hard and cold.
Bobby and I will have a good, long talk. Bobby has a lot of explaining to do.
I'm sure it was an accident,
Corky said, suddenly bursting into the conversation.
We've done this dive 1,000,000 times, really.
She tried to hurt her, Deborah insisted. I watched her the whole time.
It's attempted murder,
she heard Ronnie tell Megan, deliberately loud enough for Bobby to hear.
Ronnie, you're going too far,
Miss Green scolded.
We saw her,
Ronnie shot back angrily.
No,
Bobby screamed, tugging at the sides of her hair.
No.
She couldn't take any more of this. She couldn't take the eyes, so many eyes, staring at her with so much hatred. She couldn't take the accusing frowns, the pointing fingers. She couldn't take the sting of their words.
No! No!
And without realizing it, she had turned away from them, away from their eyes, away from their hatred, and now she was running, her sneakers loud against the hard floor, running blindly, her eyes blurred by hot tears, running with her hands outstretched, running to double doors, and pushing through them into the coolness of the hallway. Out of the heat, away from their eyes, their unforgiving eyes, she turned and ran towards the stairs, past the white-coated paramedics hurrying toward the gym, carrying a stretcher and black bags of equipment, past a surprised group of students gathered in the middle of the hall, up the stairs and out of the building, without stopping for her jacket, without stopping for her books. Out into the cold, gray afternoon, her sneakers crunching over dead leaves, hot tears stinging her eyes. She ran as fast as her heart was pounding. She just wanted to run forever. And then 2 hands grabbed her roughly from behind. Bobby gasped and flailed out with both hands.
No, don't!
She cried. Chapter 16. Strange Shadows.
Bobby, what's wrong?
Chip let go of her shoulders and backed away, startled by her wild reaction.
Oh, Chip,
The words caught in her throat.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you,
he said, his eyes studying her, his expression alarmed.
I saw you running and...
Chip, it happened to me too, Bobby blurted out, half talking, half crying. She grabbed the sleeve of his leather jacket, pressed her face against it.
Huh? Where's your coat? Aren't you cold?
It happened to me too, she repeated, not recognizing her shrill, frightened voice. She straightened up, saw that her tears had run onto his jacket sleeve. I couldn't move.
You? Really?
Chip stared at her, as if he didn't quite know what to make of her words, as if he didn't understand or didn't believe her.
I'm going to the doctor's for tests right now, he said awkwardly. I was just telling Coach I had to miss practice. He said,
I couldn't move, Bobby repeated, as if repeating it would make him believe her. I couldn't raise my arms, just like you, Chip. She stared into his eyes imploringly.
You should get to a doctor too, he said softly. Mine thinks it's some kind of muscle thing. These tests...
A horn honked loudly, insistently behind them.
Hey, that's my brother. He's taking me to the doctor,
Chip said, turning to wave to the driver.
I've got to go.
Can I call you later? Bobby asked. I mean, I've really got to talk to you about what happened.
Yeah, sure,
he said, jogging to the car.
I'll be home later.
He stopped suddenly and turned back to her.
You need a lift?
No, she shook her head. I want to walk. Thanks. He climbed into the passenger seat. The car sped off. He's the only one who will believe me, Bobby thought, watching the car until it disappeared around the next corner. He's the only one. It happened to him too. I'm not cracking up. I'm not. I'm not cracking up, she told Jennifer. It happened to Chip too. Jennifer's eyes flared for a brief second when Bobby mentioned Chip's name. She wheeled herself back against the wall, giving Bobby room to pass her, and entered the den. Thanks for letting me come over, Bobby said, gratefully. She tossed her backpack onto the floor beside a couch and started to pull off her coat. My parents took my little brother to a Cub Scout dinner, and Corky is babysitting tonight. I just didn't want to be alone. That was so awful this afternoon, Jennifer said, speaking slowly, cautiously. You must have felt terrible. She wheeled herself back into the den, banging into the frame of a narrow doorway, backing up, and succeeding on the second try. Bobby dropped her coat on top of her backpack and rubbed the sleeves of her blue long-sleeve pullover to warm herself. Yeah, I was...
She stopped, unable to describe how she had felt. So, did Chip talk to you about it? Jennifer asked. I tried to call him. There was no answer. No one at his house. Would you like some tea? Jennifer asked softly. You look chilled. No, thanks. Maybe later, Bobby said. Do you believe me, Jen? Do you believe that I didn't deliberately let Kimmy fall? I talked to her mother, Jennifer replied, avoiding the question. She has a broken wrist. It's in a cast, but it's her left hand, so it isn't so bad. Do you believe me? Bobby demanded, sitting on the edge of the couch, leaning forward expectantly, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. I really don't know what to believe, Jennifer replied reluctantly. It was like someone was holding me down, holding me in place, smothering me. My arms were useless, Bobby said, explaining it for the 100th time. Useless! My whole body was useless. I know what that's like, Jennifer said, with sudden bitterness. She stared down at her legs. Oh, Jen, I'm sorry, Bobby cried, jumping to her feet, feeling her face grow hot. That was so thoughtless of me. Jennifer gestured for her to sit back down. You've had a hard day, Bobby. A horrible day. Do you think Miss Green will let me stay on the squad? Bobby asked, dropping back onto the couch. Jennifer shrugged. Do you want to try to study or something? Take your mind off what happened? Bobby sighed. I don't know if I can take my mind off it. Let's try, Jennifer said, tossing her beautiful wavy hair behind her shoulder. I'll make us some tea and we'll try. Jennifer tried valiantly, but she couldn't rouse Bobby from her frightened, unhappy thoughts. No matter what they talked about, Bobby's mind trailed back to the gym, back to her mysterious, terrifying paralysis, back to Kimmy's plunge to the floor. Again and again, Bobby heard the crack of Kimmy's wrist breaking. She heard the thud of Kimmy's forehead hitting the floorboards, saw Kimmy's head snap back and her eyes close. Again and again, she saw the accusing eyes of the other cheerleaders and heard their outrageous cries. A little after 11 o'clock, Bobby glumly pulled on her jacket, hoisted her backpack to her shoulder, and headed for the front door. Thanks for keeping me company, she told Jennifer, and leaned down to give her friend a hug. Anytime, Jennifer replied with a yawn. Where are your parents? Bobby asked. Visiting some friends, Jennifer said sleepily. They'll probably be home soon. Well, thanks again, Bobby said, pulling open the front door, feeling the chill of the night air against her hot face. See you tomorrow, Jen. Get some sleep, were Jennifer's parting words. She wheeled herself to the door. Bobby closed the door behind her. She looked out into the dark, starless night. The air was cold and wet. From the driveway, she could see a white covering of frost on her car windshield, reflecting off the streetlight. Shivering, she made her way down the drive, her high tops crunching over the gravel. Crunch, crunch, she thought, like the crunch of bones. When she got down to the car, she rubbed her fingers over the frost on the windshield. It wasn't very frozen. She didn't need to scrape it off. The windshield wipers would take care of it. She pulled open the car door. Then, before climbing behind the wheel, she glanced back at the house and gasped. Whoa! She exclaimed out loud, her breath steamy white in front of her as she squinted at the large living room picture window. It was the only lighted window in the front of the house. A window shade had been pulled down, covering the entire window. The bright living room lights made the shade bright orange and cast shadows onto it. Moving shadows. Squinting hard, Bobby realized that she was seeing Jennifer's shadow against the shade. And Jennifer was walking, pacing back and forth in front of the window. Whoa! Bobby repeated. She blinked several times. But when she reopened her eyes and directed them back to the window, the shadow didn't change or fade away. Jennifer, Bobby knew, was the only one home, and Jennifer was out of her wheelchair. Jennifer was walking. "What's going on?" Bobby asked out loud. "I'm definitely cracking up," she decided. "I've got to get help. I'm seeing things." She took a step up the driveway, then another. Her sneakers slid over the wet gravel. "I'm crazy, crazy, crazy!" But no, as she drew closer to the house, the gray shadow against the orange shade continued to move steadily back and forth. The image grew clearer, sharper. It was Jennifer. She was walking. Her hands knotted in front of her. What's going on? Bobby wondered, her mind whirring with wild ideas. Is it a miracle? Did Jennifer just this second discover she could walk? No, that wasn't likely. Then, has Jennifer been faking all along? Why? Why would she fake paralysis? Why? Bobby stepped back onto the stoop. She rang the doorbell. She had to know. She had to ask Jennifer what was going on. She leaned toward the door and listened for Jennifer's footsteps. Silence. She rang the bell again. Finally, the front door was pulled open, revealing a widening rectangle of light. "Jennifer!" Bobby cried. Chapter 17. Cracking Up. Standing on the front stoop, Bobby stared into the yellow light of the front hallway. Jennifer held the door open, her face filled with surprise.
"Bobby, what's the matter?"
"Oh, Bobby stammered. "Nothing. I thought I forgot my gloves." Jennifer's face relaxed. She settled back in her wheelchair. She wheeled herself back a few inches, still gripping the doorknob. "Do you want to come in and look for them?" "No," Bobby replied quickly. "I just remembered I didn't bring any gloves. Sorry." Jennifer laughed. "You're really in the state, aren't you?" "Yeah, I guess." Bobby felt totally embarrassed and confused. And worried. Jennifer was in her wheelchair, a small blanket over her lap. Why had Bobby imagined that she'd seen her pacing back and forth across the window? Had Bobby imagined it all? Imagined the moving shadow? Imagined the dark figure walking across the living room? "What's wrong with me?" Bobby asked herself, saying goodnight to Jennifer again and trudging back down the gravel driveway. Her breath rose in puffs of white steam against the cold night air. But Bobby didn't feel the cold. In fact, she felt hot, feverish. Her forehead throbbed, a sharp pain just behind her eyes. Why am I seeing things? Am I seeing things? Am I cracking up? Really cracking up? The headlights seemed to skip and dance as she drove through the silent darkness back to her house on Fear Street. The house was dark except for the porch light. She realized everyone must have gone to bed. Tossing her jacket onto the banister, she hurried up to her bedroom and, without turning on the light, shook Corky awake. "Huh?" Corky cried out, frightened, and sat up stiffly. "It's me," Bobby whispered. "Wake up!" "You scared me to death!" Corky cried angrily. She never liked to be awakened. Bobby clicked on the bedside lamp. "I saw Jennifer walk," she blurted out. Corky yawned. "Huh?" "I think I saw Jennifer walk. I'm not sure, but—" "What time is it?" Corky asked crankily. "You must have been dreaming." "No, I wasn't asleep," Bobby insisted. "I was standing outside her house. I saw shadows." Corky stretched, turned, and lowered her feet to the floor. She brushed a strand of blonde hair from over her eyes. "You saw shadows," her face filled with concern. "Bobby, I'm really worried about you." "No, really, I saw her," Bobby said, not realizing that she was almost shouting. She stood over her sister, her hands knotted tensely in front of her. Feeling hot and trembly, the pain still pulsing behind her eyes. "Maybe we should tell Mom and Dad," Corky said, glancing at the bedside clock. I mean, just stop and think for a minute. Bobby, first you told me you saw all the lockers at school open and close when you walked down the hall. Then you told me you were paralyzed at practice this afternoon. You couldn't move, you couldn't speak, and that's why you let Kimmy fall. But Corky, let me finish, she said sharply, holding up a hand as if to fend Bobby off. Then there was that weird story about Chip, about how he froze too and couldn't move, and now you come home from Jennifer's and... But it's true, Bobby cried. It's all true. I mean, I think it's true. Don't you believe me? Corky was holding her hands over her ears. Stop shouting. You're screaming right in my face. Sorry, Let's go tell everything to Mom and Dad, Corky urged. I really think you have to go talk to a doctor or something. I think you need help, Bobby. I really do. You don't believe me, Bobby accused heatedly, bitterly, her head throbbing. You don't believe me. Without thinking about it, she picked up Corky's pillow and heaved it at her angrily. Hey, Corky cried, grabbing the pillow and tossing it back in its place. Just don't talk to me, Bobby snapped. Traitor. Oh, fine, Corky cried. That's just fine with me. You're crazy, Bobby, crazy. Bobby stormed over to the closet. Shut up! Just shut up! Don't talk to me ever again! She began to tear off her clothes, tossing them on the closet floor, muttering to herself. Corky punched her pillow, fluffed it, and slid back under the covers, turning her back on her sister. She's gone totally crazy, she told herself. She's just so weird. Imagine calling me a traitor because I think she should talk to someone and get help. Me, a traitor. And now she's gotten me so upset I'll probably be up all night. I hate her. I really hate her, Corky thought darkly, struggling to get comfortable. She just makes me so mad. Corky might have been more sympathetic. She might have been more understanding, more caring, more believing. But Corky had no way of knowing that this was the last night she would ever spend with her sister. Hey, I just wanted to pop in here and give a big thank you to anybody who is listening because I'm surprised anybody is, and thank you. And I also want to thank my husband who upgraded my equipment so that I could actually edit this stuff and it not take a year. And that also helps get it out faster. So thank you, Pio. I love you very much.